Welcome to the latest episode of the Skiffy and Fanty Show.
They imagined my glorious death, some tri-world calamity averted by my noble sacrifice, some deep space conundrum unlocked only for my cherished, severed head to be swaddled in linens and ferried back to their homeland.
That would be a line from the book, and it's a hell of a line. I'm Shaun.
I'm Trish.
And on today's show, we are talking to Daniel Kraus, the Pulitzer Prize-winning New York Times best-selling writer of novels, TV, and film. Welcome, Daniel.
Thank you very much. Happy to be here.
So, Daniel Kraus's novel Angel Down was the 2026 Pulitzer Prize for Fiction winner, which huge congratulations, by the way. That's big.
Yeah, thanks.
It was also a New York Times top 10 book of 2025 and a national bestseller. So you hit like a lot of different lines there. His novel Whale Fall received a front cover review in the New York Times Book Review, won the Alex Award, was an LA Times Book Prize finalist, and was a best book of 2023 from NPR, the New York Times, Amazon, Chicago Tribune, and others. Holy moly.
And it's being made into a movie coming out this fall. With Guillermo del Toro, Kraus co-authored The Shape of Water, based on the same idea the two created for the Oscar-winning film. And along with del Toro, Kraus co-authored Troll Hunters, which was adapted into the Emmy-winning Netflix series. He co-wrote The Living Dead and Pay the Piper with legendary filmmaker George A. Romero. Kraus's The Death and Life of Zebulon Finch was named one of Entertainment Weekly's top 10 books of the year. Kraus has also won the Bram Stoker Award, Scribe Award, 2 Odyssey Awards, and more.
But today, we're talking about this upcoming book coming out June 23rd from Saga Press of Simon & Schuster, which is The Sixth Nik, a galaxy-spanning adventure novel that I think is going to break some brains.
I hope.
But before we get into our discussion of The Sixth Nik, a reminder to our listeners to please share your questions and comments with us at skiffyandfanny.com/listener suggestions. If you aren't already here, please join us on Twitch for Shaun's Alphabet streams most every Friday at 7 Central to be a part of our interactive live streaming show format. And finally, be sure to review and spread the word about our show. Help support us through our Patreon and be part of our Torture Cinema polls, live watches, or other special Patreon-only events on Discord. A mere $1 US per month will give you all that power.
Okay, Daniel. So, if you could, tell our listeners what The Sixth Nik is about.
Well, that's going to be my least favorite question of the whole thing because I've had a crazy last couple months, and I have not been able to come up with like a way to talk about this book. So my last couple books, I could kind of tell you in one sentence. This one, I'm afraid I'm about to launch into a 7-minute like ramble about what it's about. So I'm going to do my best, but I'm going to miss things, I'm sure, and then I'm going to talk too much about other things. So let's just give this a go. It's about this 9-year-old girl named Cecilia, and she's part of this cult called the Nunavak that lives in Greenland. And this is about 500 years in the future. And what this cult has access to this arcane technology that no one knows where they got it, called the Niks. They're nicknamed the Niks, and there's 6 of them. And what they do is they get a brand new baby girl, and they cut open the head, and they insert these little objects into the brain. And then they sew up the head. And then they raise this girl with the assistance of this tech to become this extremely... She's not psychic, but she can read people really well. And therefore, when the Niks are at their greatest ability, between when she's 9 and 11 years old, she's sent on a chore. And it's something of like really great import that this girl can now help solve, strictly because you can't really lie to one of these girls. And so she's a great moderator, and she brings countries and nations and worlds together and facilitates the solving of these great issues. The problem with this new one, there's been 55 of these girls over the years, is that she, through reasons I won't go into, she's lost one of the Niks. It has come out of her head, basically. And so she still has it. She has it, she hides it. But and this opens her up to start feeling emotion, because these previous girls, they're almost robotic. They're just sort of brilliant and problem solving and very cold and harsh. And she's a little different, but she's hiding it. And then she's sent on her chore, which is to get on this ship called the Sickness. And the Sickness is a ship woven of biomatter. So it's a ship. What they do with these new kind of ships called plasmographic ships is they yank out a tooth of all the crew members, and then they use the DNA that they harvest from those teeth to weave a ship out of biologic matter that is specifically detailed for the specific crew members of that ship, to anticipate their needs, to respond to the needs, to reformulate. Because it's made of flesh, it can sort of move and change, and it's, this one's called the Sickness because it looks like a tumor. Like in the future, like aerodynamics and sort of form doesn't matter anymore. It's all function. They're sent. Their mission is to go to this planet called Fem. That's many, many light years away. I'm almost done. And this is a planet where a bunch of people who had suffered from a plague have been sent. There was a plague called willosis, which was a disease that was in sheep, and it hopped over to people. And there's some sheep whose wool will grow forever and kill the sheep if you don't shear it. So once it jumped to humans, people's hair started growing inward, and the hair would like strangle all their organs and kill them. So if you were to cut them open, hair would just come like flying out. So anyway, they were sent to Fem because Fem was a last-ditch effort to save them, because they had detected this. There's oceans of metal on Fem, like this kind of like chains of gristling metal creates this rust, and this rust has this healing property. So they sent these people to Fem to see if it could heal them, and it did. But now Fem has gone offline, and the universe is upset. They send these people to go see what happened to these plague sufferers, and then all sorts of just awful, horrible things happen.
I think that gives you a taste of I think part of the issue with trying to describe this book is actually its plot is really complex, and the world that it is set in is really complex. And the world is actually the thing I want to start with, because that's big. There is an enormous amount of world building here. Lots of small details, big details, different kinds of factions of people and cultural elements woven throughout in what is, it's a decent chunk of a book, but it isn't, like Dune, right, in terms of its size. And so I kind of wanted to ask more of a question of your approach to sort of weaving world building into a story, and how you get that density of the world building in a story that still feels like it's moving forward.
Mostly out of ignorance, because although I read sci-fi, I like it. It's a genre I'm not an expert in. I read sci-fi every year, but it's not. When my editor of this book, the legendary editor Joe Monti, would make references and say, "Oh, this part is kind of like this," and I usually would have no idea what he was talking about. But I like to change genre. I change genres constantly, and so I never really had a sense of how to do it, because although I change genres all the time, generally they take place in our world, and they're not in the future, and I do a lot of research, and I kind of figured out that way. This was totally different, and so I think, I say this about a lot of my books, if I knew how hard it was going to be, I wouldn't have done it. Like, it was only in the doing of it that that slowly it became this complicated thing. It had the idea was this little seed of an idea that ended up not being the book at all. Like there's a little scene in the middle that's not even that relevant to the story. That was the original book I was going to write. And it grew like a fungus almost, like in all directions. I was like, okay, how do these two... It was going to be like one of those stories that almost has like two characters. And it started there, and I was like, well, how does this character get her? Well, maybe she's in this cult, and what's up with the cult? And then it just kept going and going and going and building and building and building. And soon I was reading books on like cosmos and advanced physics and all this stuff. And it was getting wildly out of control, or at least I was worried that it would. And so, yeah, I usually write pretty linearly. Like I'll start at the beginning, and this one was not. Like I approach this in an extremely haphazard way. I do work with outlines, and for a book that has this complication to it, this much complication to it, you would have thought it would be the longest outline I've ever done, and instead it was the shortest because, it was a tiny outline, really. And just as I started writing, I would encounter something, and so then I would think, well, I need to come up with a reason that is, and it would just grow. And then that was part of the world now. It's like, okay, well, that's something now I have to deal with. Now, I've decided it's a tri-world, so now it's Mars and Earth and Europa, okay. And then I'd go, another 5 pages, and I come up with something else, and I'm like, okay, now that's got to be part of the world. So it's just kind of a piecemeal thing.
That's really interesting, because to me it felt really coherent. I mean, there's a hell of a lot going on in this book, but it felt to me pretty coherent.
Well, I mean,
it all tied together.
Yeah, I mean, since this is not my first rodeo, first sci-fi book, but I've done, over 30 books. Like, I know now the things to do to help me. So, like, every time I come up with something, I added it to this world document. So it was, and then sometimes just in the adding of it, I would add some more and be like, oh, then I should do this and this and this. And so then, parallel to the book document was this world document. So they sort of both fed one another, as they went.
One of the things that I kind of made a joke earlier about these sort of fleshy ships, and it's the thing I just found morbidly fascinating, and I think probably intentional on your part, because of not just the way that they're created, but the sort of the way you describe them is simultaneously very darkly humorous to me, but also like incredibly uncomfortable to a point. Yes. So when you're describing, like, there's a moment when we're in the main character's head, and so we get sort of a little bit of history. There's like a moment where you explain like other people also had some adjustment problems, which once you describe the interior of one, I'm like, oh, I get it, because this is inside my mind, like it's reading me. And I'm going to have like, a butt nostril will be in my ship. And right. And so one thing I have to ask is, was this just like a wild idea that kind of, as you're describing this on the seat of your pants kind of idea, and then you just had to develop it? Or was it something that came from some other place?
I can't say I can specifically say where it came from. It was, one of those things that popped up along the way, probably when I was doing my science research. There's a lot in the book that's about bodies, and there's a lot in the book about births, and stillbirths and abortions, and there's a sort of a running kind of thing going on about birth and death and sort of, who's in control of whose bodies and all these things. So I think that it probably dovetailed with that nicely, because the ship is essentially a child of all the crew members. Like, they're I think there's 5 crew members. They're all the mothers and fathers of the ship. And then, I'm not going to spoil it, but you can, since you guys have read it, you can kind of see how that cycle continues as the story goes on. So I bet it had something to do with that. But also, I love writing, and this has been the constant. If there's only, again, I change styles and genres constantly. But if there's been one constant through all my books, it's been that I like to write as beautifully as possible about the most grotesque things. And this certainly fits into that, because the plasmographic ships are, they're repulsive. They're physically repulsive in different ways. And they'll be like, there's one of the crew members has a lab and there's this big dome over it, but it's really a sarcoma. It's like a part of a cancerous cell. And then someone's cabin is made of like scrotal tissue, and there's like everywhere you turn, there's different parts of the body that, you can, once you start thinking it in that way, you can really use in interesting ways. If someone gets hungry, the ship sort of knows, and it sort of opens almost like a polyp or something. And there's food that's sort of channeled through the ship, almost like through an esophagus, to where you are. So there's a lot you can play with once you just sort of commit to the bit, which I always try to commit as hard as I can.
It does seem to some degree that you use this line, I like to write as beautifully as possible about the most grotesque things, but there's like a tension in that to some degree, right? Because we're not meant to find the grotesque beautiful, but and I still find the ships kind of horrifying, but I could see where the beauty could kind of come in, because they're being described with all of this language that is in some cases somewhat medical, which is actually neutral if you're thinking about it carefully, and at other times being described as, with flowing lines and lobes and these kinds of things. And then like there's softness in there as well, like certain tissues if you just think about what they are, right? They're soft. They're not gross. It's just in a context that there's that tension that is there. And I imagine that is something that is kind of an intentionality for you.
And the ship is always trying to help them, like if they have to walk for a long time in the ship will reform so they can walk downhill, or they'll use psychology, excuse me, and do the opposite. Like it senses that Cecilia finds safety when she has the highest ground. And so it specifically makes it walk upward to her cabin so that she feels safe there. So it's doing all these little things to make the different crew members feel comfortable. And there's a point where the crew members begin to suspect the ship is against them. But is it really, or is it helping them in a way that they don't understand yet?
Yeah, I wanted to latch on to that because there is the point that the ship is doing what it thinks will make people comfortable, but they actually had to partially lobotomize from an earlier generation of ships that had been doing things that were making its passengers very, very uncomfortable at all. And there's this constant thing throughout the society of trust the system that picked these 5 very different people and threw them together. Trust that they're going to gel into an effective team. And trust the ship. It wants to help you and stuff. And I kept thinking of the problems with AI. And, how do you trust when you can't follow the logic chain of whatever this thing is making its decisions from? How can you really trust the decisions and motivations of what it's doing?
Yeah.
So were you specifically thinking about that kind of thing there's a lot of trust issues in this book.
Yeah, sort of. Like the plasmographic ships in a way are a reaction to what has happened to the internet. So they're trying to wrest control of things again. because what the internet has in the future is called the snarl, and it has gone out of control. In the future, everyone has some modifications in the brain, some like not like Cecilia has, but like small electronic mods, and the internet, which became infested by troll bots, connects to those mods, and that doesn't sound, that's not that crazy of an idea. I'm sure other people have come up with that idea. The problem is, once the internet became infected by all these troll bots, they created something called the atrocity algorithms that plugged into people's heads via the mods and began to show them all the worst things that anyone could ever dream up, to drive them insane. Sort of hold them hostage with these endless stream of atrocities. And that feels very much a plausible path from the AI that we're already seeing. So in a sense, the plasmographic skips are a way to try to get around that. Let's get away from technology. Let's just use the flesh of the people who are doing it as a way to sort of hold it back a little bit. Like, if it's born from us instead of technology, maybe we can maintain some control over it. Now, it's debatable whether that happens, but that's maybe the aim of it.
Yeah, I love the idea, because if you think about it, right, like, this is like trying to go back to nature, but trying to control nature the way we have always, as humans, tried to find control over nature. And I think it is presently still debatable how much control we really have over nature. And these like atrocity algorithms immediately made me think of I haven't seen stories recently, but a while back there were stories about the like human moderators of social media who would like see the stuff that the automated systems don't get, and they just see nasty, horrible things all day long. And there were studies showing that they suffered from, effectively PTSD, because they didn't get to see happy puppy pictures like the rest of us. They saw all of the really gross stuff. And I don't know if that was in your mind, but when you were explaining, it immediately made me think of that.
Yeah, I've done some research on that. A lot of it has to do with like the dark net. Not all of it. And there's I can't remember if it's the CIA or FBI, probably FBI. There are certain agents whose job it is to watch all that stuff. So we're talking about like child pornography and various other horrible things. And their job is to look for it and to watch it and kind of squash it or find out who's doing it. And most people who are put into that position last like one day. And the ones who don't, though, obviously develop PTSD about it. Like, they look at atrocities all day long. So imagine if there's a future where anytime you just want to look up what's the recipe for pumpkin pie, you're risking being caught in one of these kind of loops of atrocities. And so the whole internet kind of has to get sealed off in the future my book takes place in, anyway.
It's really disturbing to think about, because right now I don't know that we take the internet for granted right now, but it definitely feels like for, 30 years, we basically looked at the internet as this just broadly amazing thing, which it is. It's an amazing invention. But now that we become more aware of all of its negative components, I'm not saying that the book is like predictive, right? But just in a way, the book is imagining the very thing we're beginning to experience now, but just sort of drawn out into a kind of much more absurd way, because the internet already has its own variation of kind of what's in the book. It's just not a thing we can't escape at the moment. We still have an exit hatch. In your book, once you get caught, there's not really an exit hatch. You're in for a very bad time.
Yeah, what they've done in my future is to essentially seal it off. And everyone has access to various smaller internets that are far less democratic. They're almost like databases. Like, they're safe, but they're limited. So if you want something that's a fact or some sort of piece of knowledge that's far harder to access, you're going to have to go into the snarl. And librarians in the future have become these sort of courageous pathfinders, essentially, where they will lead you into the snarl, and because they sort of know the pathways, and a lot of them go crazy. A lot of them, end up, completely losing their minds.
Your future's dangerous.
Yes.
It is dangerous, but on the flip side, all this sequence of girls throughout the years has solved a lot of global problems. Like cancer has almost been obliterated, the environmental crises are almost gone. And that's the main tension of the book is that worth the fact that every roughly 12 years, one of these girls, after that sort of 9 to 11-year-old age, the nicks in their head go nuts and corrode their brain, and they turn into raving lunatics, and you have to cut off their head and send their head back to Greenland so they can take out the nicks and put them in the next baby. So is it worth solving all these amazing, perennial problems if every roughly 12 years you have to cut a little girl's head off?
This reminds me of Le Guin's Omelas.
Of course.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny you say that because that's what my editor said. He said, "Oh, yeah." And of course, I had never read it. Of course, I had never read any Le Guin, if you can believe that. So finally, like after the book was done, I finally read that story. And now I'm like such a huge fan. Like I just read the word for world is forest. Oh yeah, like he was dead on, just as you two were. Like it's like very different stories, but that central idea is similar. Yeah.
Right. Well, the whole idea of sacrifice and trying to figure out what is worth it. I was actually wondering for a while if the Sixth Niks were engineered to make the little girls make their heads explode, basically, by 12, before they started to grow up enough to really start questioning their own societies. Was it done by design that they crashed out before they're old enough to really start questioning everything that they've been fed and taught from infancy? They're told from infancy, don't be emotional. Don't show you're emotional. Don't show it, but also don't be emotional. And, logic very much depends on your initial assumptions. And if you don't question those initial assumptions, logic can lead you to truly horrific actions and
Right. Yeah, because logic without empathy can be absolute disaster. Like the Nazis probably thought they were being very logical, and we saw. Now, there's a reason this book begins with a Joseph Mengele quote. It's you're really onto something there, and that's one of the threads of the book is Cecilia starting to wonder, and the people aboard her ship sort of encourage this. Is this a good thing? Is this cult? Are they what they say they are? Are the things they told you legitimate? Some of these things, and this is actually not super public news yet, but there is a sequel to this book. It's it's sort of breaking news here, and it's going to come out in a year, 1 year from now.
Oh wow!
Now, don't be afraid if you don't read the sequel. The first book sort of stands alone, but there is another book, and it will go into some of these questions. Yeah.
Interesting.
Gosh, there's so much to ask about this. I did have a little trouble with the premise that creating a human lie detector would solve diplomatic problems, because a lot of times lies act as social lubricants, and a lot of diplomats know that the other side is lying anyway. So what good is it going to have a little girl saying, "You're lying"? Yeah, we know they're lying. We're just trying to find a compromise here. So I had a little trouble with, what made the whole world accept these little girls as their saviors.
First of all, how dare you? And second, no, it's as the book goes into it, I think this is book one. For the first 10 of these girls, essentially that was the opinion. This is ridiculous. They're pulling one over on us. This is silly. And then I believe the 10th one succeeded in such a fantastic fashion that the whole world was sort of taken by this what if. What if this is real? And I'm trying not to spoil something here. Boy, this is tough. How do I answer this?
Oh, you don't have to answer it.
I don't have to answer it, right? I can just say I'm not answering this. But yeah, there's an element to that which is wanting to believe, just as the cult itself.
People think, AI will save us. AI will give us the answers.
Yeah, there's several things in the book that are questionable about what's really happening and how much is placebo effect. How much are people just wanting things to believe? How much can these girls really do versus how much do we just want to think they can do? And so that's sort of a larger version of that, is just having the girl in the room becomes an instigator for people to give in to their most optimistic selves in a way and say, okay, we're gonna work together, and this girl is the catalyst, our excuse to throw away what we believe about our country and how we're gonna do it right, and give in to this sort of more utopic idea of, well, we can't hide anything from her, so I can't maintain this solidarity with my country anymore. We have to work together. I have no choice. This sort of is the opposite of sort of what we know now, where everyone's retreating to their corners, where this gives a permission for everyone to come together. So it is this sort of utopic ideal in a book that's very not utopic, but it starts from this idea that's very optimistic, that there can be someone who, through no nefarious means, through no weapons or anything like that, can sort of be a catalyst for everyone being their best selves. So yeah, whether or not you believe it or not, that's the idea. That's the sort of fantastical idea at the center. It's a fantastical idea of optimism that is then sort of undercut by all these things that had to happen to get to that place.
That's very interesting, because it seemed to me that science fiction has had threads of this where science fiction authors explore notions of faith, and they usually do so through very explicitly religious connotations. In this, I suppose you could make the argument there are some explicitly sort of religious connotations because of the sort of cult element that is presented, but you weave throughout this book a lot of elements of faith, the belief in others, sort of relinquishing yourself to, the will of others, or to, trust in others, in even trust in weird flesh ships and those kinds of things. There's a lot of that faith that's present there. I wouldn't necessarily call it religious faith, but it seems to me that that's one of the major threads throughout this book, which you've kind of already talked about a little bit, but I was hoping to tease you a bit more out about how you kind of play with this idea of belief throughout the book.
Yeah, that's interesting. I don't think I've thought about that much with this book, but it doesn't surprise me, though, because I tend to write about religion a lot. Wellfall and Angel Down are both heavily involved in that. So it would make sense, a lot of sense, that's buried in here too, even if it was less intentional. And certainly book 2, but very much more explicitly talks about belief as in a different way, kind of a path out of the situation. I'm being very vague about book 2 on purpose. Because when you get to the end of book 1, you're probably like, how was there a book 2? But, so yeah, I'm trying to think if there's... It is interesting. It's almost... Because the girls are all treated as sort of chosen ones in a way. But in a really kind of odd way, though, because they're all engineered,
Yeah.
And they're not and they're chosen just by chance. Like, when one girl dies, what's the next newborn girl that we run into almost, Yeah, and there's elements of all of them are forced to sacrifice themselves. They're all supposed to, it's a given that they are going to die for the cause. I'd have to think about it more. I'd have to think about the fact that there's not just one, but there's repeatedly. It's almost like a savior factory. We're going to create a savior. We're going to kill her. We're going to create another one, and that's a really fascinating idea.
Yeah, and
I'm not saying
disturbing.
that 'cause I came up with it. I'm astounded by it just now.
Cool. So let me switch to a different character that you introduce in here. You introduce the concept of the murders, which was probably my favorite section when we meet Murder 005, because I was like, I don't understand this, and I need to dig into this now, because it is such a fascinating character. They are these sort of, they're literally murderers who speak about them. They like take the tenets, and they're almost like a cult in and of themselves. They do murder as a population control element, which is technically illegal, but there's also one on this ship on this very important mission, serving as like effectively a bodyguard. And I'm not really spoiling a lot, because this is just the second section, right? It's pretty early that we introduced to this character. And the first question is what?
Yeah, all the characters, all the crew members, they're a real motley crew for sure. And I think the biggest surprise for me about that crew was like, this is it's a very dark book. But I was really surprised and happy about how much I ended up liking those characters. Like, they become like a real light in the darkness. Like, most of those crew members, 3 of those crew members end up being like really sweet, is a weird word to apply to anything in this book, but like really important to Cecilia, and make her a better person and understand herself more. And they each have a sort of a different facet. And Murder 5, I usually just say Murder 5. And the 5 is based on how many people they say they've murdered. So, once they kill someone else, they become Murder 6. And then there's the whole thing with the bodysuit. They wear these full body white suits, and then when they're when they get ready to murder, they put on the black bodysuit. They are. I kind of lost the question. Was there a question, or am I just kind of talking about murders?
I guess I'm kind of curious of how you developed this concept, because it's out there a bit.
Yeah, it is out there a bit. I don't know. I think, as with everything else in this book, it was a piecemeal thing where it's like, I need who's going to be aboard this ship. Well, I need a captain. I need an engineer. I need sort of a medic. And maybe I need someone who's could serve as sort of the muscle, the bodyguard or something. And it's really fun to have a character like Cecilia, who's like this pint-size kind of Terminator in a way. Like, she's not violent, but she's so cold and so brilliant and intelligent, and can, like, with just a cutting remark, like, cut anyone down. It's fun to have her talk to different kind of people, for them to react to such a strange little girl who's so much smarter than them. And so that became part of the fun. Like, so part of it was probably like, what would be a type of character who would create, because a lot of those are opening scenes. Like, she has these long conversation with Murder, then a long conversation with Fang, a long conversation with Jane, and there's these two-person scenes that are really these sort of long conversations where you see them sort of, in a friendly way, sort of battle it out and sort of outwit each other. And so it just made sense to me. I think that it would be fun for me to have her talking to someone who, on the face of it, is so immoral and so unrepentant about it. And, you know, seeing things through Cecilia's eyes, like, of course we murder people, you know. And she would try to coldly logic it out. And then the murder could sort of fight back in a way. And it just became a fun kind of fight. As far as the details of the murder, I have no idea where all that came from. That's just me kind of riffing. I love all three of those characters so much.
You know, I find it very interesting that, I wouldn't say that Murder 5 is immoral agent per se, but the very first murder they described to us, I don't know that we would call it a murder. I don't want to get into the detail,
yeah, right.
But it would be called self-defense, sorta. But we also wouldn't say it necessarily is entirely unjustified. Maybe the exact methods used might not be justified, but given the context, and I won't ruin it, people need to read the book, I feel like we get a weird element there of like, well, but the first murder we hear about is not really an immoral act, at least not purely immoral.
Yeah, no, that's right. And, this is just one murder, so you have to imagine that there's a sort of scope of how the murders act individually. Yeah, like, they're not just going around and shooting random people on the street. Like, they're trying to rid the tri-world of the unnecessary humans.
Yeah, almost in like a eugenicist kind of way. Yeah. Which I don't know if that's the language they would use for themselves, but it is kind of how the book describes them.
Yeah, like they feel anyway that they're going after the bad guys.
It's a very interesting idea, and I don't know if you're going to explore it in the second book. You do not have to tell me, but I want more.
It did this, I don't generally write series at all, so writing the Sixth Nik definitely, it made me understand why there are so many science fiction series. Because when it came to writing another book, with Saga, and I got contracted to do a couple of sci-fi books with them. I had all these other ideas, and I just kept being drawn back, to this world. And I saw it for the first time. I really tangibly viscerally sort of understood. Like that's why people go back. Is like you've created this stuff, and the Sixth Nik, I mean, it just touches upon it. Like we're just glancing upon these things that so fascinating to me. So writing the second book was really a chance to, like, there are some things that if I were to tell you, I'm not going to, but like they're sort of offhand things in the first book, like world building that, is sort of interesting, but we don't get into, that are massively important in the second. And that was the kind of thing where it was fun to, like, all through the writing of the Sixth, and I was taking notes and about, like, oh yeah, that thing that I mentioned, boy, I could do this, and that could result in that, and I know that's not going to fit in this book, but I'm going to take the note anyway. So I sort of get it.
I think that's the best kind of world building, where you're not closing things up, you're constantly opening more questions to explore.
Yeah, and I could see how, and I'm sure there's a lot of people who would say different, and they know better than me, honestly, in this genre. But I imagine there are people who create the world first, and it's almost a sealed thing, and then, play around inside of it. And I get that, because I work with outlines a lot, and so that makes some sense to me. But this was a real seat of the pants, like, it felt very free in a really exciting way. Like, this was one of the most fun things I've ever written.
Cool.
Well, I'm glad you had fun writing it. I realize we're talking about world building, and my brain, went back to my childhood and seeing the cantina scene in Star Wars for the first time. Which kind of what you're describing is the reason that scene, I think, is so important to so many, like, Star Wars fans, because at the time we didn't even know who any of these people in that room were.
Yeah.
But you could imagine their stories, like weird guys with horns and all of these things. And I think that leaving those kernels, and some of them get explored, right? But having elements in your world building that are these interesting ideas, but the story's not about that. And so it gives the reader something to sort of almost imagine on their own, or like really want more of, and maybe they get it and maybe they don't.
Yeah, it was a real education. Yeah.
Well, speaking of fun and childhood, I want to get in at least one question about Angel Down.
Sure.
Which I had a great time reading. I mean, content warnings for war and horrible stuff, but I really enjoyed following the character journey. And one of the things that really surprised and delighted me was that Bagger was reading to Arno, and the book they were reading together, or that he was reading to him, was currently The Son of Tarzan, and Bagger was all about the conflict between Korak the Killer and his father Tarzan, and really that was mostly projection on Bagger's part. I think there isn't that much, but that is a book that is a heart book for me. Yes, there are problematic elements, but my father had a tattered 1917 edition, not a first edition, but really close, and it had some beautiful plate illustrations in it, and so I was just absolutely delighted to see it keep coming up and coming up and coming up in the book. And I wondered, why did you pick that book for them?
There are a few reasons. I've done a couple books with George Romero, posthumously. Like, he was my favorite artist, and he left behind a couple manuscripts, and I finished them for his estate. And George's dream project that he never got to realize was a Tarzan movie.
Oh.
And at some point when I was involved in the Romero books, I bought a set of those little paperbacks of the full Tarzan series.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of as an honor to him. And about once a year, I'd read one. I haven't read that many of them, but I had gotten through certainly the first few. And then I was sort of cross-checking with, when I was writing Angel Down, I was like, this is 1918. What are books that would have just come out around then? And
Right.
I had looked at several, and I investigated them. I kind of looked into their plots, and was like, what would make the most interesting counterpoint to what's happening in my book? And I landed on there were a few options, but I was like, well, I own Son of Tarzan, so it's right here in my office. So let me try that. It sounds like it could be germane. So I reread it, and that's really it, you know. But I will say, my editor, the Sixth Nik, sent me a first edition, but he purposely got the worst copy of it he could. Yeah, he said he wanted
Right.
to get one that looked like it had been carried all over World War One. So I have this like completely destroyed first edition
That's
copy of
awesome.
Son of Tarzan.
Oh my goodness. That's fantastic. Well, we gotta wrap up because, you know, you have a life and other people have a life. And so real quick, we technically have 2 closing questions, but you've already answered one. We know that you are working on a second book, so you already told us, and so we got that. But people may want to find you and your stuff, so where could they find you?
Just go to danielkraus.com. Kraus. And that's your main hub.
And go buy everything.
Of course. Goes without saying.
All 30-something novels. Get them all at once. So, all right. Well, Daniel, thank you very much for coming on the show with us and talking to us about the Sixth Nik and your other work. We appreciate it.
You got it. It was very fun.
So for folks at home, again, if you have any thoughts on the episode, if you read this book, please review it, of course. skiffyandfanny@gmail.com. Please let us know. Or if you're on the Discord channel, you can just go on the show discussion or book discussion and talk about the book. We're on all kinds of social media sites. If you just want to find all our links, go to skiffyandfanny.com/skiffythings, and you'll find all of our stuff there. And then it's just a friendly reminder, Friday, 7 p.m. Central, pretty much everyone for the year will be at twitch.tv/alphabetstreams for our live show format. And then patreon.com/skiffyandfanty if you have money you don't need and would like to donate.
And we'd like to thank all of our Patreon supporters. Adam the Adventurous, Andrea the Abounding, Cameron the Chthonic, Carolyn the Benevolent, Carrie the Divine, Chris the Candescent, Dan the Transient, Daniel the Cultured, David the Debonair, Elizabeth the Electrifying, Erica the Esteemed, Jeff the Gracious, Joe the Jocund, Joseph the Jovial, Juan the Junctional.
And KB the Kind, Karen the Kick-Ass, Kat the Kinematic, Matthew the Magnificent, Paul the Pious, Robert the Reliable, Robin the Bold, Ryan the Resilient, and then we have 3 Sarahs, but we're missing some vowels. Sarah A the Sensational, Sarah E the Sublime, and Sarah O the Rapturous, Stephen the Strange, Terry the Thorough, Tanya the Triumphant, and Trish the Imperturbable. I'm at SeanDuke.net, and I'm on Alphabet Streams Wednesday, Sunday, 6 p.m. Central if you want to find me. Put /Duke things on my website if you want to find all my nonsense.
I write a lot of reviews at Skiffy and Fanty's blog, and you can find me occasionally on my own blog, whatsthewordnow.blogspot.com, more often on Blue Sky at P.E. Matson, and on Mastodon at Trishium at Newsy.social.
All right, Skiffy and Fanny bylaws require me to make this hopeful at the very end, and I will just make it hopeful by saying that Trish and I will be building our own flesh ship together, made out of toenail. It'll start with the toenail. I'm not giving up a molar. Sorry, Daniel. I can't. That sounds... When you describe that, it's horrible. I'm not doing that. They can have like just the edge of my toenail. I'll clip it off for the machine. It's fine. And Trish and I are going to go explore the Oort cloud. Because, I don't know, it seems like there's interesting stuff in there.
Great idea.
And on that note,
all right, everybody,
take
care of yourselves and each other.